Most people don't realize they are living inside a pattern.
They believe their struggles are random, caused by bad luck, other people, timing, or circumstance. But then, quietly, something unsettling begins to emerge. Different jobs lead to the same dissatisfaction. Different relationships end in the same emotional place. Different years carry the same regret. And eventually, a question forms that feels less intellectual and more personal. Why does this keep happening to me? Carl Jung believed this question sits at the center of the human experience, not as a complaint, but as an invitation. According to Jung, repetition is never accidental. When life repeats itself, it is not mocking you. It is attempting to teach you something you have not yet learned. To Jung, what most people call fate is often unconscious psychology playing itself out again and again. His most famous and most unsettling statement captures this precisely. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. This idea challenges one of our deepest assumptions, that we are in control of our choices. Jung argued that while we like to believe we act freely and rationally, much of what we do is shaped by forces we have never examined. Forces formed early, reinforced quietly, and left unquestioned. The unconscious, in Jung's view, is not a dark vault of madness. It is simply the part of the psyche that has not yet been made visible. And whatever remains invisible does not remain inactive. It expresses itself through behavior, emotion, attraction, avoidance, and, most importantly, repetition. This is why insight alone can feel so uncomfortable, because once you see a pattern clearly, you can no longer pretend it isn't yours. Repetition often hides in plain sight. It does not repeat events exactly, it repeats emotional outcomes. The setting changes, the people change, the details shift, but the feeling at the end is eerily familiar. The same sense of disappointment, the same resentment, the same feeling of being misunderstood, undervalued, or unseen. Jung believed the psyche repeats experiences because it seeks completion. When something meaningful has not been consciously processed, the mind does not let it go. Instead, it recreates similar situations in the hope that, this time, the individual will respond differently. But without awareness, we don't respond differently. We respond habitually. This is why people often feel trapped in their own lives. They are not trapped by circumstances. They are trapped by unexamined patterns. The unconscious does not negotiate. It repeats until it is acknowledged. At the center of this repetition is a tension between two forces: the unconscious, which wants integration, and the ego, which wants stability. The ego prefers what is familiar, even if what is familiar is painful. Change threatens identity, and identity, once formed, resists disruption. So rather than asking, "What is this pattern trying to teach me?" many people ask, "Why does this always happen to me?" The first question opens awareness. The second preserves the cycle. Jung warned that when we refuse to confront our inner life, life itself becomes increasingly confrontational. Not because it is cruel, but because it is compensatory. It pushes back where we have become rigid. It repeats where we have refused to see. In this sense, your mistakes are not failures. They are messages. But messages lose their subtlety when they are ignored. And this leads us to one of Jung's most important contributions to psychology, the concept that explains why repetition is not just common, but inevitable when left unconscious. The shadow. Carl Jung believed that every personality is divided, not between good and evil, but between what is accepted and what is rejected. The rejected parts form what he called the shadow. The shadow is not inherently destructive. It is not a moral category. It is psychological. It consists of traits, impulses, emotions, and needs that were pushed out of awareness because, at some point, they felt unsafe, unacceptable, or incompatible with the identity you learned to survive with. Some people suppress anger to remain lovable. Others suppress vulnerability to remain strong. Some suppress ambition to remain moral. Others suppress dependency to remain independent. Whatever is pushed down does not disappear. It waits. Jung understood that the shadow does not seek expression politely. When denied a conscious voice, it speaks through indirect means, through tension, compulsion, resentment, and repetition. This is why people often repeat mistakes that seem irrational even to themselves. The behavior is not random, it is symbolic. Repetition, in this sense, is communication. The psyche recreates situations that activate the shadow because it wants recognition, it wants integration. And until it receives that, it continues to surface in disguised forms. This is why people are often confused by their own choices. They find themselves drawn to situations they consciously know are harmful, relationships that feel familiar but unstable, roles that guarantee overextension or invisibility, conflicts that repeat with different faces. Jung did not believe people seek happiness. He believed they seek psychological consistency. The familiar, even when painful, feels safer than the unknown. The psyche prefers known suffering to unfamiliar peace. This is why patterns endure long after they stop making sense. A major mechanism behind this process is projection. Projection occurs when aspects of the shadow are displaced onto others. Instead of recognizing certain traits within ourselves, we perceive them externally. We become intensely reactive to behaviors in others that mirror what we have disowned. You may strongly admire someone for qualities you have never allowed yourself to express, or you may feel immediate hostility toward traits you unconsciously fear exist within you. In both cases, the reaction is disproportionate because it is not really about the other person. It is about you encountering yourself indirectly. Projection explains why certain people trigger us without obvious reason, why some relationships feel magnetically intense from the beginning, why we fall into emotional dynamics that bypass rational judgment. Jung observed that what is unconscious in us appears to us as fate. We encounter externally what we have not confronted internally. This is why repetition feels inevitable. The psyche arranges circumstances that mirror unresolved inner conflicts. Not because life is conspiring against us, but because we are unconsciously participating in our own patterns. The ego resists this realization. The ego's role is to maintain a stable sense of identity. It explains, justifies, and defends. It prefers narratives that preserve innocence. It was their fault. The timing was wrong. I just have bad luck. But Jung believed the ego becomes dangerous when it refuses to evolve. When it prioritizes comfort over truth, it becomes rigid. And rigidity invites compensation. Life compensates for inner imbalance by creating outer friction. This is why repeated mistakes often intensify over time. What begins as subtle discomfort becomes conflict. What begins as dissatisfaction becomes crisis. The psyche escalates when it is ignored. Yet Jung was clear on one point: awareness alone is not enough. Understanding a pattern intellectually does not dissolve it. The shadow does not integrate through insight, it integrates through ownership. Ownership means recognizing that the pattern, however painful, is not happening to you. It is happening through you. This realization is uncomfortable, but it is also liberating. Because the moment responsibility returns to the individual, so does agency. And this is where repetition begins to lose its grip. Carl Jung did not believe that psychological growth comes from eliminating parts of oneself. He believed it comes from integration, the conscious acceptance of what has been disowned. Integration does not mean acting out every impulse or indulging every trait. It means recognizing what exists within you and allowing it a conscious, constructive role. What is acknowledged no longer needs to express itself through distortion. This is where most people misunderstand change. They attempt to fix their lives externally while leaving their inner structure untouched. They change partners, careers, cities, routines, yet the same emotional outcomes follow them. Jung would say the container has changed, but the contents remain the same. Patterns do not dissolve through force, they dissolve through clarity. Clarity begins when you stop asking why life keeps doing this to you and start asking what within you is being activated. This shift is subtle but decisive. It moves you from victimhood into responsibility, not as blame, but as authorship. Responsibility, in Jungian terms, means accepting that your psyche is participating in your experience, even when the experience is painful. This does not excuse harm done by others. It simply acknowledges that repetition requires cooperation. When you bring a pattern into consciousness, you interrupt its automatic nature. What was once compulsion becomes choice. What was once fate becomes information. Jung believed that the psyche stops repeating lessons once they are learned, not intellectually understood, but lived. When the shadow is recognized, it no longer needs to sabotage. When denied needs are acknowledged, they no longer manipulate behavior from behind the scenes. This process is often quieter than people expect. There is rarely a dramatic breakthrough. Instead, something subtle changes. You pause where you once reacted. You notice attraction where you once rushed. You feel discomfort without immediately escaping it. And slowly, the pattern loses energy. Not because life became easier, but because you became more conscious. Jung described this movement as individuation, the lifelong process of becoming who you actually are, rather than who you adapted into. Individuation is not about perfection, it is about alignment. When your inner life and outer actions no longer contradict each other, repetition loses its function. Mistakes, then, are not signs of failure. They are indicators of unfinished integration. They persist only as long as they are misunderstood. The most profound shift occurs when you realize that life is not punishing you for your blindness, it is responding to it. And when you see clearly, life responds differently. What you are willing to face in yourself no longer needs to appear as fate. What you integrate becomes choice. And what you choose consciously no longer repeats unconsciously. If this exploration resonated with you, consider sharing your thoughts in the comments. Reflection deepens when it's expressed. If you found value here, a simple like helps this work reach others who are searching for the same clarity. And if you want to continue these deeper psychological explorations, subscribing ensures you don't miss what comes next.